Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention. Maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Hey everybody, happy Monday. Welcome back to the Voice of Gord podcast. I got a good guest here for you today. A little quick intro. Rob Carpenter's been on the show once before. He's a writer at FreightWaves. He has his own Substack. He talks about trucking with a very deep level of experience and understanding. He's been a driver. He's worked with insurance. He's worked with safety consultants. He's worked with private equity and trying to manage stuff for them. He's been on all sides of the equation. He's been an expert witness. He's done crash investigations. He just does all the things. He builds software. He wears a lot of hats. And he's helped me figure out a question that I and many others ask me about, which is how do these guys, these terrible carriers that get in collisions all the time, these bottom of the barrel trucking companies that have shown up all across our landscape here in the last couple of years. And so Rob tells us how they're being insured and how that's, questionable and dysfunctional and all the rest of it. We had a pretty substantial conversation and about some of his other writings and lots of issues going on in the industry. As always, extremely informative. I'll have links to all of Rob's work down in the show notes. He's a regular at FreightWaves. He has his Substack called The T, also called Talking Reckless, depending on how you get to it. And he's a member, he's a partner at TruckSafe, and just all around good guy, great reporter on trucking. And I think you guys will learn quite a bit from this episode. Got a few more lined up here for you later in the week. I've been on a couple myself with my friend Trish Wood. I taped with the Grammarica Outlawed guys yesterday. Everybody is wondering what the heck is going on with our roads. We just had another tragedy in Canada. These two young teenage girl hockey players killed in Alberta by a trucker whose identity they are not releasing, because of course they're not. Anyway, that's enough of me editorializing. You all know what to do. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, corrections, or hate mail, send it to me, gordylocks@protonmail.com. Subscribe to my Substack, autonomoustruckers.substack.com, and go pre-order my book. It comes out later this month, March 24th. End of the Road, Inside the War on Truckers, which you can get at creedandculture.com. If you're in Canada, you'd be better off ordering it through indigo.ca, or if you must, it's on Amazon as well. All right, guys, let's get to it. All right, g'day everybody. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of the Voice of Gord podcast. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. The other voice you're going to hear today is a returning guest. This gentleman jumped on here last year. Found him online, I don't know, about a year or so ago. Really good writer in the trucking space and has been on all sides of the equation. Driver, safety guy, insurance researcher, done all kinds of stuff on management side, over and above driving. You've probably seen his work on Twitter and at FreightWaves, especially in the last couple of months here, which is why I had to get him back on, because he's really been tearing it up and explaining to people just what in the hell is going on with the trucking industry and what we're seeing out on the roads today, now that the trucking industry is coming under some pretty heavy scrutiny by the public and politicians and the media, given everything going on out there. So please welcome back to the show, Mr. Rob Carpenter.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, not bad for Sunday at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Could be worse. Could be Saturday at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I tried recording another show here last week at 9 p.m., after working all day and then dealing with kids and all the rest of it. And man, I was struggling to keep the last half of that show going. I was really, really tired.
It'll do it. I mean, the weekend you should probably get some catch up, but you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, I've been way behind. This is going to be my third podcast for 2024, and it's we're halfway through February. I recorded one yesterday, and the one I just mentioned earlier this week. So hopefully, I'll start releasing them soon. I've just been too busy. Thought I was going to get lots of stuff done over Christmas holidays. That didn't happen. Lots of family stuff and traveling, and then this book I've written has kind of taken over my life. Meetings, emails, podcast interviews. And as many people know, I haven't turned a wheel in 2 years because the trucking industry is a disaster, and employment opportunities around my neck of the woods are thin at best. So I am working construction, and boy, oh boy, that's no joke, man. You're tired at the end of the day.
You're doing framing, right?
Yeah, I'm helping a buddy of mine's sort of design build architecture firm. They have their sort of own in-house carpenters. So we do most of them, foundation frame, roof, interior trim, all that. Obviously, we subcontract out most of the trades, but yeah, we're working on a project in Cayuga Heights, which is the sort of ritzy area of Ithaca adjacent to Cornell. And we're doing a pretty major renovation on a, 100-year-old place down there and their guest house and another building on the property. And yeah, it completely tore the roof off, gutted the whole place. We're completely reframing it and redoing it, like full on. The only thing we left on the building was the walls and the exterior.
That'll do it.
Yes,
That'll
sir.
that'll make you sleep good.
Yes, sir. Seems to me, while I'm out there swinging a hammer and running air nailers and all that fun stuff, you are just tearing up the internet here, sir, with article after article after article, either on Twatter or FreightWaves. Been really hot production schedule here.
Yeah, it's I don't know. You're probably the same. I mean, there's people like us out there that just think constantly all the time about all the ins and outs of what's happening and then the nuances of it, and then you write about it and you think of a story off of it, and then you think of another story off that one, and the next thing you know, you got like 10 stories in your brain that you need to get on paper. And when you're constantly in thought mode and thinking about all this crap all the time, that's a constant. And in October, I think we talked about this last time. I think I just cut my finger off, my right index finger, so typing sucks. Dude, it was like for like a month, I was like middle finger in the keyboard, and it was taking forever. And I tried dictation through these cheap platforms, like the ones that's included in Microsoft, and it was garbage. It didn't understand Southern Redneck and everything like that. So I was like, I've got to find a better dictation system. So somebody turned me onto this thing called Dragon Dictation. It was $600, and I was like, this better work. It better understand Korean or anything I want to speak. And sure enough, it did. I mean, so it's pretty great. I don't know if I'll ever type again now because I mean, you speak and it spits out what you tell it to. So that's made things a lot faster. But I still have to like triple check everything because sometimes it doesn't do exactly what you want from that side, the grammar, the spelling, the formatting, etc.
Well, all right. Well, that answers part of my own thoughts about your massive amount of output as of late. I was a little curious how you were pulling that off, and if you've got a really really effective and competent dictation converting program.
Yeah, after I cut the finger off, I had never even heard of dictation. I didn't even know what it was. And then when I started, we're just running into the slowdown with this finger, and I was like, there's got to be something out there. So when I discovered this, and it's basically freaking talk to text. I mean, really, you just spit your thoughts out and you formulate it the same way you type it. So it's great.
Good stuff. I notice sometimes you'll see people's tweets or text messages, and it's sort of something feels a little bit off about it. Like you get the gist of it, and you realize a lot of people are driving around and they're doing talk to text or whatever. They don't check and they just hit send, and it is what it is.
Worst part about X is that you can't change a reply or anything. So I mean, if it's really bad, I'll just go delete it. But usually I'm like, forget it, man. The human brain can figure out what I meant.
Yeah. So, obviously, all of this writing had to come from somewhere and talk about something, and that something is trucking and the regulatory regime above it playing catch up with a lot of issues and just all the stuff going on out there. I mean, we've all been harping on about this for a couple of years now. Everyone sees it. Extremely high increase in crashes, very, very public now because everyone's got a camera and we find out about things almost immediately. And if you're like us and you hang out on FreightX, everyone sends you things or you see it. And there's a whole constellation of influencer types on Twitter who have decided that all this chaos on our roads is good for engagement farming. So when you got big accounts amplifying stuff that we normally pay attention to, it resets the algorithm, and then your feed is just wall to wall truck incidents and commentary, sometimes good, often bad on the industry, sometimes correct, often not. And it's good to have deep dives from people that know what they're talking about to go and check. And you're one of the purveyors of those deep dives. So let's start with I think you wrote this piece just on X. Maybe you put it on FreightWaves as well about the insurance, because a question that people who are paying attention to all of this ask themselves is, who the hell is insuring these morons? And that's a question I tried to pursue for my book and didn't get much in the way of answers out of any insurance people. And I think my book is defective. And boy, oh boy, if your article would have been written a few months ago, I would have I would have used that as source material. So yeah, tell us what's going on with trucking insurance and how it is that some guy that just got here from Eritrea or Somalia or India working for a shady chameleon carrier gets insured.
Well, I think that you kind of got to understand the dynamic of the insurance market for trucking. And one of the things that I've tried to work on with this is try to build indicator models of what does a chameleon or a less than reputable carrier model look like, and what are some indicators of that? And one of the indicators is insurance. So you've got a wide spectrum of insurance carriers here. Now, if you look at captive groups, which are basically groups of really well organized legacy trucking companies that have compliant programs and structures, are supposed to, or are known to, they'll join a group captive or a sole member captive where they're basically self-insured. Either they're self-insured by themselves, a sole member captive, or they're group insured with a group of their buddies, like-minded carriers, etc. The cool thing about a captive group and those legacy compliant carriers is, to get into a captive group, they send someone to your business and they make sure that you are who you say you are, and that you have programs and systems in place to make you an acceptable risk on the highway, right? So there's a gatekeeper that's still there that protects members of the captive, because if you have somebody that gets into this captive group that's an unskilled Somali and doesn't have those things, it's going to drive up all the other members' costs in the captive, right?
Almost sounds like you're describing a guild.
Yeah. Yeah. So these people get in, they share in the costs and the losses of each other. And they do that because they understand that everybody that gets into this group are all legitimate carriers that want to do the right thing. There's a huge barrier to entry there. It's expensive to get into. It's got a lot of benefits to it, but you're not going to walk in the door and just pay for it. Somebody's going to let you in. There's a gatekeeper. The other side of that spectrum is now instant issue insurance, risk retention groups, and that's where you find all your trash carriers, because that's where the subprime insurers live.
All
Those are
right,
the
let's
people
define all these terms, okay?
yeah.
You just said three of them in a row there in that last sentence. So let's
Yeah.
break that down first.
So you got a lot of different types of insurers, and you've got prime insurers, which are kind of more on that side, on the captive side of the market. These are your prime insurance markets that are low risk, low premium, vetted carriers. Then you've got your subprime insurers like Geico, Progressive, um, and a host of other ones you've never heard of, but that will basically insure the bottom of the bottom, even worse than Geico and Progressive. So that's basically, it's kind of like used car lending, right? You can go to Mercedes Benz, and if you've got good credit and you've passed that barrier to entry for a loan, they'll give you a 0% loan for 60 months because you deserve that, right? That's your high end market. But then if you've got trash credit and you just like you've had four repos and you've got bad credit, you're going to go to that buy here, pay here guy who's going to charge you 40% interest. That's your subprime lender. No difference in insurance. There's no barrier to getting a buy here, pay here, just like there's no barrier to getting into the subprime insurance market. So you can be in Moldova and self attest that you have X amount of trucks in the United States and X drivers and X policies, and they instantly issue you a quote and instantly give you a coverage when you pay. So,
How now that's going to sound amazing to the untrained ear or people who don't know anything about trucking. I mean, it's still shocking to people in trucking that this goes on, and I'm just wondering where is the gap in regulations or the law that allows insurance to be issued to people that haven't been vetted whatsoever? Because it's one thing to extend someone credit, in a
yeah,
subprime
with a
scenario
credit check.
where yeah, but like insurance, we're talking about trucks on the highway that are like riding next to families in minivans. I would think that there's some kind of like minimum uh requirements or vetting requirements or something on the part of the government over and over top of the insurance providers. Like, what am I missing here?
There is to some extent, but there's really not in terms of who they allow in, right? So the the check here is supposed to be an underwriter. And traditionally, let's just say before, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago or whatever, we had underwritten policies where if you decided you wanted insurance, when I started my trucking company decades ago, I had to try to struggle and get insurance. I had to talk to underwriters. They wanted to know what policies I had. They ran the MVRs of my drivers. They looked at everything I had in place. And then they said, nope, we're not going to insure you because of these following reasons. You're not going to become a truck. You're not going to become a trucking company owner because these things keep you from doing that. Correct these things, build better programs, build better systems, and we'll insure you. That underwriter was really setting the criteria of who they were going to accept as a risk profile into their insurance program. Now, fast forward to today, and you've created these non underwritten, non barrier markets where you can go on a website, self attest to whatever they ask you, not verify really any of it, and then they give you an instant quote based on some algorithm that they've developed to say, this is good. And based on these things, we're going to give you a quote of $1,200 down and $400 a month. You pay that fee right then by credit card, and boom, you have instant insurance. There's no underwriter there, right? No one is there to review that file. You automatically have insurance. They're going to file it with FMCSA, and congratulations, you're a truck driver. So, one of the things that I wrote in the article, I think Friday, was uh, jets, right? Like you have influencers who go out there on social media and they show you the Rolls Royce and the big house. They've rented the house on Airbnb. They've rented the car from Enterprise Exotics. You can fake all that, right? But the guy who's got the jet, like Grant Cardone, you're not going to fake the jet, right? The jet is your barrier to true influence. We are billionaire status, right? So you're not going to fake the jet. And I've always compared that to the trucking industry of insurance. You can get the $300, like it's not hard to come up with $300 for an authority. You can but you can rent a Penske truck for $750 a week to get the authority to say you have a truck. For $1,000, you're into trucking, but there's still a barrier left, and that's insurance. And historically, that insurance barrier has really been what kept people out. That was our jet. Now you've gotten to a point where you can actually rent the jet, the insurance, basically. And there's all kinds of ways that you can do it, but I think the big problem is here we got away from a human underwriter that knew risk, understood trucking and the risk associated with highway transportation. And we got away from that person reviewing people for acceptance into the policy. And we started just letting computers decide that, all right, thank you for attesting to how many trucks you have and who's going to be your driver and who you are. Here's your rate. Thank you. Welcome to trucking.
Systems can be easily fooled, whereas humans cannot be, or at least the well-trained variety.
Yeah, yeah, and I do think that the human element has created the issue because what started to happen in the underwriting world is we had boomer generation underwriters born in the 30s and the 40s, old school underwriters that really understood trucking risk, and they could talk to you and they could evaluate your trucking company and your risk model and say, no, this is not a good idea. I see problems here, 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 and here, and no. Well, now because of that, we've kind of advanced, right? We've got people born post 1995, post 2000 even that are becoming underwriters. But these are tech kids. These are computer kids. They've never seen a truck. They've never had hands-on in the industry. And they're trying to underwrite trucking policies. And what we started to see happen with this new age of underwriters, this youthful age of underwriters, was they were underwriting risk as a gatekeeper, not knowing what trucking risk really entailed. So chief underwriting officers at companies would say, forget this crap. This new age is screwing us up. We're going to develop an algorithm with a system based off the boomer mentality model. And then we'll let that decide instead of letting these millennials figure it out. So there was a reason behind it, but it's gotten to the point where we basically put everybody on the highways at risk because we're not screening who we're allowing to get into the industry by the insurance model.
Right, yeah. So it's kind of like being online. Twitter doesn't screen for AI slop or robots very well. Engagement farmers, all kinds of bad content. I don't know if I stretch that comparison too far there, but
no, you're spot on. I mean, there's supposed to be vetting and screening for a reason, right? I mean, so if you once you lose that element of it, you kind of lose the protections of whatever it is that's whether it's a group or an industry or a highway transportation system.
Right. So there's a question I want to ask you actually. It's very specific. Because vetting involves, or at least the AI version of it or the super nerd version of it, something called actuarial data.
Yep.
Right, which they use to sort of work out the risk assessment.
Yep.
I interviewed a guy for the Buck, who's the father of one of our Twitter mutuals and owns a trucking company in Ohio. I'm not going to say his name because I could only use part of the commentary for the Buck. He was a little uncomfortable with me sharing too much, so that's fine. But he did say something that I thought was curious, and is that according to his insurance people, drivers with 20 years of experience or more are less likely to get into a collision or a crash, but when they do, it's a bigger one, more serious, and that younger guys, less experienced drivers, are going to have a whole bunch of small things, bumping into each other at truck stops, ripping off hoods, breaking shit, but at low speed, low severity, but higher frequency. And something didn't sit right with me when he said that. I think he was trying to say that this is being used as justification for the sort of discrimination problem as I see it. Like, if you take a break from trucking like I have, right? Like I've been
Yeah.
off the road for 2.5 years. It's going to be very hard for me to get back in as a company driver anywhere. Not because I don't have experience, but because A, I've got too much, and B, according to actuarial data, if you're out of the truck, somehow they consider that like a risk factor. So I'm just curious from like your side of the street and you're working on all this stuff, like how much of that is like either fake, bullshit, cooked numbers? Is it true? Like what are you seeing?
No, it's true. Like if you go to Walmart right now and you're out of the industry, like I don't drive full time. Even right now, I still drive. I still have a truck. I'll drive grain maybe, throughout the harvest season in Virginia. But if I went to Walmart right now, even having 25, even having a CDLA with all endorsements, TWIC card, you name it, hazmat, med card for 2 years. If I went to Walmart right now, nothing on my record, PSP's clean, they wouldn't hire me. And the reason they wouldn't hire me is because their criteria requires 2 years most recent full-time experience. And I have 2 years experience, obviously, but I haven't been in the truck full time, right? So that's a consideration for major fleets, and that's a barrier to entry that a lot of your legacy, legitimate, serious, risk-focused fleets take into consideration. But um, is it is it accurate to say that they cause more crashes? It is, but I would say, or
How
they're
so?
what?
How is it that's an accurate statement because it defies sort of common sense?
Well, I would say this. If he's saying that the data says this, I'm not going to say it's true. If he's saying that the data, let's just say the data says this, then let's just agree that it's right for this statement. You have to understand that there's data out there that you can mold to whatever you want from a messaging standpoint, right? So I can take that data set that says older people are more involved in crashes from a frequency perspective, but they're less severe. Okay, let's agree to that. The problem with that data is there's other data elements that skew that output, right? And these people are all working on statistics and probability and data analysts and all that crap. What they're not always taking into effect, and sometimes what they'll remove from the equation is what are some other pieces. One of the other pieces might be truck drivers' life expectancy is 61 years old. They're not wrecking more often because they're dangerous or they're purposely not good drivers or they're just bad drivers, period. They're wrecking more often. Maybe 10% of those crashes are because they die, right? Like they die and they have a medical emergency behind the wheel and they crash the truck. It's not a fault of their own. It's something that's just it's human. It's natural. But they remove that element and they just put out this aggregate statistic that people over 40, drivers over 40 or over 50 are more prone to being more crashes. Well, if we're saying that's true and we're just acquiescing that it is,
No,
um,
I think it was less crashes. It's just that they're more severe
yeah,
when they
and
do
and even
happen.
that goes more to the medical emergency because a lot of times when you have a medical emergency, you're not hitting the brakes. You're not taking uh measures to reduce the impacts of the collision, and instead you're going across highways and knocking out four cars and then running the truck through a business, right? So there could be all kinds of data elements that we remove from that the context nature of the data, right? And that's one of the things that I hate about a lot of data systems is that it's especially FMCSA data and NHTSA data is they'll put out these blanket data points, less than one sentence, right? There's no context to that data whatsoever. But if you start adding context elements to the data, like what are the ages of those drivers? And instead of just considering how long have they been a truck driver and what is their age, start looking at some of the contextual elements of the statistics and the data. And then that changes the big picture outcome of it. But a lot of entities like NHTSA and FMCSA don't always put that out there unless you're going to go for the deep dive, pull the whole piece on that topic and read the entire thing. Then you realize, oh, well, that's because 40% of these old people that are crashing are having medical emergencies behind the wheel. So And then for me, my mind immediately goes to, all right, so we have maybe a medical examiner fraud problem, right? So it's
Well, that is a problem, and
it is.
it's been highlighted here. They've actually chased down a few medical examiners post some of these incidents when it's pretty clear that the driver involved, yeah, maybe not the healthiest guy on earth. This crash that happened in Texas, these Hope Trans guys,
Yeah,
that Cuban fellow that was driving the truck,
it's a big boy.
uh, at very least, he must have suffered from sleep apnea or hypertension or something.
Yeah.
And how he got his medical card is a mystery to anybody that looked at him.
Well, get to they had one in Sacramento and they revoked over 1,000 med cards after he was pulled out of the registry. What they determined from their investigation is that in Northern California, this guy was actually operating out of different fast food joints. He would basically tell people where he was going to be at a certain day, McDonald's on the corner of whatever, and people would show up at the McDonald's, pay $500 and get a 2-year med card. Well, they ended up busting this ring, but then everybody that got a light when that happens, everyone loses their med card. You've got to go get recertified. But some of these I've done, and there's one in Florida that's in a gas station. I've been there. I've gotten a medical card from them. And what's funny about when I got a medical card from them from this specific clinic was it's a chiropractor in a gas station, literally. You go in, you don't really do a whole lot, and some of it's even self-attesting. Like if you fail the blood pressure portion, she let me go home, record a monitor on my arm, and send her the video to show that my blood pressure was good. And then she gave me then I went back and got the 2-year card. So there's all kinds of like foolishness with this. But in that specific clinic, we started sending drivers. We sent a total of 40 drivers, some of which had heart transplants. Some of them had no feet. Every single one of them got a 2-year card. So I trended all this data. And then once I had it, I sent it to the FMCSA and was like, there's a problem here, buddy. Like, here's this guy's last long form. Dude has no feet, brother. He just got a 2-year card from this gas station clinic in Florida. So it happens all the time. And the barrier to entry thing is real. It's not just for insurance and who we let into trucking from a company perspective. We've got a lot of other issues in terms of self-attestation and fraud in general.
Yeah, and this speaks to the sort of broad, ongoing and years long process of dissolving those barriers to entry.
Yep.
In my paranoid mind, that's a wage suppression operation, right? Because if you
Yep.
have more people in an industry, you have more of something, the price goes down. And labor is a commodity like any other. Sorry, we're not all that special. I mean, we are in some ways, but flooding the market with labor has a purpose, and that is to suppress the individual price of that labor and thus save money for the people buying the services of trucking companies. And unfortunately, that dissolving the barrier to entry also dissolves a lot of human bodies because people are getting behind the wheel that shouldn't.
Well, I think one of the issues with a lot of people in our society is they look at truck drivers like they're less than at this point. And it hasn't always been that way. It used to be a thing where truck drivers were revered and they were productive members of society and they were what drove America, and that was the vision that people had when they thought about a truck driver. Even when I was a kid, my dad was he was a bad person, he was an addict, but one thing that you saw a truck going down the road and the first thing he said is, that's the guy. He's making it go. He's making the money. You should go do that when you get older. That was the mentality of a lot of people, right? And now we have a society, even the doctors that are giving out the med cards that are looking at truck drivers and saying, dude, it's just driving a truck. The guy doesn't need feet, right? Like, you know, I'm serious. They just look at it like it's a dummy occupation that anybody can do. So why do we need to go through this rigmarole process to get a 2-year med card? Just give the guy his 2-year card and let him go to work. It's not a big deal. So part of it is that, but it is perspective and perception. But it's a funny industry, dude. And the more we get into it, the more time goes on, the funnier it gets.
And by funny, you mean tragic.
Yes, 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 yeah. I'm
Oh
notorious
man.
for saying funny, but you know, it's my dark sense of whatever. But
Yeah, I just finished writing this thing for Substack. I might hit send actually when we get off this call. I think I've done everything I can do with it. I've been fretting over it for a while now. And uh it's about an issue that goes across countries, right? So the trucking industry operates pretty much the same in most places, basically moving things from point A to point B with large vehicles. How it's regulated, how it looks, how it functions can be different in those countries. The article in question is about one particular migrant group who seem to be everywhere and running off the same playbook in these countries. But, that's separate to what my comment is here. But I feel confident enough in writing the thing because in those, I've operated in all four of the countries I discuss. And, you know, two of them, specifically Australia and New Zealand, had pretty high barriers to entry to get into trucking, and they meant it. Like they're not their own trucking industries were not without problems, but they had a graduated licensing system, so you have to have 1 year driving like a straight job or a box truck or a dump truck or something before you can go sit your license to pull trailer, and then another one for B trains and road trains in Australia, and that's all good. Their medical, you know, at least 25 years ago, Australia didn't have chiropractors and gas stations that would sign off on your medical card. Like Australian medical, the Australian driver's medical examination was pretty thorough, as a matter of fact. In fact, it caught so much stuff that I had to take a secondary test for my vision because I'm partially colorblind.
okay,
I have a deficiency in the sort of red, orange, pink, that end of the color spectrum, and so there's all kinds of shades that I don't see, and that was picked up in my vision test to get a road train license, and I had to go do another test, which is this like little funny green light thing that shows you can see contrast, which determines the severity of that color dysfunction in your vision. And I passed that one, and they gave me the license. But like this, all of this is to say that like it doesn't have to be this way here in the US. And this is not to say that America is not number one or to be anti-patriotic or whatever, but I think we can learn from some other countries and how they operate. And obviously these things are changing. Australia is having some problems right now. Again, uh, government mismanagement, and then insourcing of drivers from this one other country who don't operate the way Australians do in large quantities, which is something that was not happening when I was there 10 years ago or 25 years ago. So that's all new, and they're sort of having some trouble dealing with that. But, the barrier to entry thing is just like people need to understand it's there for a reason, right? This is not like some anti-competitive monopolistic, oh, you guys just want to, close this thing off and hoard it all for yourselves and act like a sort of, you know, a cartel. But like this is road safety, man. Everybody drives on the roads. This is a common, this is the commons. This is a publicly owned infrastructure that we operate on. And so therefore the public has some say into who should be operating on it and by what standards, and like those standards are gone, like they've just been obliterated, and that we're starting to see that obliteration of standards pop up in other countries that used to have much higher standards than us.
yeah, I think some of it goes back to where mentality has kind of changed over the years, and I think when I was a kid, I was raised on a farm by grandparents. They were born between 1918 and 1938, and my brother, he died of an overdose now, but when he was a young kid, he had an eye problem, and he had a surgery for it. Well, the doctor messed his eye up even worse, didn't fix it, right? And my grandparents refused to sue because they had a moral, ethical piece of their brain that was sometimes distorted, especially in this case, because it was this doctor's obligation and responsibility to fix, not destroy. but they didn't believe in suing people because it wasn't money that they worked for. And there was this character piece that they had that has largely disappeared. There was a work ethic, there was a character, there was an understanding of a community moral and ethical obligation to other people and a consideration of other people. And I think we've lost that. There's no doubt that we've lost that because growing up with those people and seeing two generations over that century, you see it warp over time, especially once you get into people that were born in the 60s, early 60s, mid 60s, and it starts to change there. It's not totally gone. It's still there to some extent. But then when you start to get into people that were 1990, 1995 birth folks, the world totally changed. And a lot of it's about consideration of other people and not understanding your moral, ethical responsibility of sharing communal like places like the highway with people. There's a responsibility there. And the funny part that I think people miss about all of it on the highway is whether it's insurance or crashes or highway accident litigation, someone has to pay for all this, right? Even if you think, oh, well, it's an insurance company and they've got $1 million policy because they're a trucking company, that's fine. Somebody's going to pay for that. And when next year, when your insurance goes up 2%, and then the following year it goes up 5%, then the following year it goes up 12%. You're paying for everyone else's degradation of the moral, ethical comprehension of what their responsibilities are to share the highway. Everyone's paying for it.
Yeah,
And
it's a externalized cost. It's one of these unseen externalized costs. Well, it is seen, and people are starting to ask why.
yeah,
Of the dissolving of barriers to entry and letting any moron get behind the wheel of a truck. The cost of that now, maybe Amazon or FedEx or USPS are getting a discount on that trucking, but that cost is reflected across society. It's being socialized.
yeah, you're basically subsidizing the risk. And I had a meeting with I think it was somebody with CBS, a new person, Friday, and they're doing a story about brokerages. And I kind of brought up how I've figured out these indicators of the worst operating carriers in our market, right? One of them is insurance. Like if you're in this subprime insurance market and you're insured by these bottom dweller subprime insurers, there's a reason you're not over here in the captive market. It's probably because the captive market, the prime insurers don't want you and you can't get in those groups, which is why you're down here. But the other indicator, one of the other indicators that I've tied to this, and I'm working with a University of Michigan guy, Jason Miller, on some data stuff that he got interested in on this insurance side. There's other elements of this that are indicators, and one of them is shippers and brokers that you do work for, right? So odds are, if you're in the spot market and you're running broker freight, you're not working for these shipper direct relationships that are relationship driven, because those people, they want a relationship for the shipper direct side. They want to know you, they want to trust you, they want to know that their freight is safe in your hands, and they'll pay you appropriately to get their freight from A to B safely. These guys on the bottom dwellers don't want that, because the more you know about them, the worse it gets. So they stay down here in this broker market, in the spot rate market, where anybody will hire anybody as long as it's the lowest rate and we can make the best margin out of it and we can get our freight shipped for less. And a lot of times you can look at the shippers and say, well, this is the freaking mail. That's why nobody cares about an envelope. I mean, we're not talking about perishables here, right? Like anybody can haul paper. So who cares as long as it's cheap. And, that's a lot of times become the mentality. You can look at who is insuring a carrier and who that carrier is doing work for and what market they're in, whether it's the shipper direct relationship driven market or the spot market, broker driven market. You can totally tell, who this carrier is by kind of who they associate with.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I've often thought about, one of these days buying my own truck and going into business. How do I sell myself as that carrier you can trust? And I would have to make a pitch that's real and speaks to my legitimate experiences, but which is not visible to insurance companies, right? So like I could approach a customer and say, look, hi, my name's Gord. I've had my license for 28 years. Here's this truck I bought. I can haul your stuff. I have all this experience in Australia and New Zealand. I ran the ice. I'm a slow driver. I've never been in a collision. I haven't had a moving violation in 20 years. Like, you can trust me. But that experience, because it's diffused across all these countries, and the insurance companies are looking at actuarial data instead of real life data, there's sort of like a mismatch there. And I think it would make it difficult for me to actually buy my own truck and get my own insurance. Like, I think I would end up in that, subprime insurance market, not because I'm a bad driver or I have a bad record. They just can't, they just don't see that, and they don't give a shit.
They can't get past it. So you have two different things here. You've got that actuarial data driven market, which really kind of is trying to push away from underwriters to where they can decide through an AI or a computer algorithm who's fit and who's not. That's largely not a subjective. Like, this is the concrete criteria in which we will accept you into our insurance program, right? The good thing about the underwriting market is there's even underwriters out there which are called like creative underwriters. These guys are not like Walmart. Walmart has a policy in place that says we cannot hire people that have not driven for the past 2 years in a truck. They can't go away from that policy because policies are supposed to be objective across the board criteria. So Walmart can't deviate. They don't get that choice. The cool thing about prime insurers generally who are underwriting these coverages, they will have experienced underwriters who understand trucking and understand truck risk and highway accident litigation and claims, and they will meet with you sometimes multiple times, whether it's on the phone or Zoom or whatever, and they will determine like why why have you not been in a truck the past 2 years? What does your experience look like before that? And they'll take all, because their creative underwriting model is not concrete, it's subjective, largely based on the underwriter. They can look at that data and say, this dude's a driving instructor. He's been driving for 40 freaking years. The market's just collapsed. He hasn't been able to get a job. We actually want this risk. Like, this is the guy we want. He teaches people how to drive. He's driven for 40 years. Like, we will take this. Forget the 2-year requirement on this guy. This is the guy we want. We need 40 of this guy.
Yeah, I'm glad to know that. That's a little white pill for me. I would go to that meeting with like a nail gun and my book and say, this is what I've been doing for the last 2 years. Sorry about the not driving part. By the way, read this book and it'll tell you everything I've done since I was a child.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they're out there, and I'm glad they're out there, because one, they can smell bullshit a mile away, right? Like, if you come there and you're kind of like trying to weed your way through it, you're not getting insurance. But when they look at it and your PSP's clean, you don't have any moving violations, you got all your endorsements, you've been driving for 40 years, there's logical explanations that they can consider as to why you haven't driven in the past 2, or why X is X and why Y is Y. They can mentally consider all of these things like a judge in court and say, I'm good with this. I know that our general industry rules and criteria are X, Y, and Z, but we're going to not look at X and Y. We're still going to consider Z, but we understand that there's circumstances out there that negate X and Y. So we're going to go ahead and sign off on this and give the approval. And then they'll even give you a custom rate that's totally not available to the public because your circumstances are drastically different than everyone else's. That's the great things about underwriting that we got away from. That used to be traditional insurance underwriting. Now, for the reasons I've mentioned previous, we have largely gotten to this point where, whether it's for, we've kind of lost the underwriting touch of having industry experience to assess that as from a subjective point, and we're trying to get more to an objective, let's just look at the data point. The problem with that is how you get the data, and it goes back to self-certification, self-attestation, just like ELDT registrants for schools, and just like med examiners for med examinations, and ELDs and all this other stuff that's all self-attestation, self-certification. You are who you are, you do what you do, and nobody checks that. That's the problem with the instant issue market is it's all based off what you say. And if it's an algorithm and they spit you a rate, you pay it and you got insurance. There's nobody on the other end of the phone that might talk to you for 2 hours to determine what your circumstances and your situation are. And that's become a big issue.
Right. So let's pivot. All right. So I think I asked previously about why is the law or regulations not doing anything about this, instant issue insurance based on trust me, bro, just trust me, bro.
Yeah.
You've been in some pretty high level meetings recently, including with FMCSA head Derek Bars,
Yep.
Transportation Secretary Duffy. So did they mention anything, or have you picked up anything from the administration side about, any thoughts they might have on reforming trucking insurance?
Nobody has mentioned insurance that I've heard of until I started really, really beating the harp on it. Now, the half article, proposal that I wrote Friday in FreightWaves, Bars did text me Friday several times. We're going to have dinner first week of March, and we're gonna talk way more about this because there's ways that for me when I do insurance risk assessments of carriers that I can scale human resources elements to make things better. And I think one of the problems that we have is like people getting into the industry from a new entrant perspective that don't get audits for 12 or 18 months. We can't because we don't have the ability to scale human resources to check these people before we give them their authority. So that's why that takes 12 to 18 months. But if
That's
we
a
could,
very interesting point. Yeah, what for the benefit of my listeners, you sign up for an MC number, you do all the little things to become a carrier, and the FMCSA doesn't check until 12 to 18 months after they've issued you an operating authority whether anything you're doing is legit.
that's it. And that's the problem, right? Like you have like say you're a chameleon carrier, you set up 4 entities because you know that your goal, whether you're a freight fraudster or you're a chameleon carrier, you know that your goal is not to run legal, forget the regs. We're not going to be here long. We're here for a short time, not a long time. So the goal is we just get in, we spend what little we need to get our authority. We run we run ragged, we burn all our bridges, we close that business when people figure us out, and we jump over to authority B. And by the time you get to 12 to 18 months, the first, second, and third authority have already been burned down. All the bridges are burned. Nobody can find these people. And there's no new entrant audit to be done because they're not operating anymore and they're closed. So I look at the new entrant program largely like I look at underwriting programs to enter the insurance market is if we start cutting them off at the door as underwriters to getting authority, then we can limit what's going into the system, not just focusing on cleaning up what's already in it. Because you're never going to get what's in it clean if you keep letting in 50,000 people a year without any screening. So,
but you do have to do both, though. And this ties into the wider discussion about the non-domiciled CDL stuff, which you've also written about. So you've met Duffy and Bars. I think it's fair to say like you're pretty operating at high levels in the back end of what goes on out on the road. People are really freaked out about, again, all the crashes and collisions, and then it ties into the sort of immigration debate and why are all these illegals here and people on EAD cards. This guy from Kyrgyzstan that just killed these Amish dudes, it went through some app, again, no vetting. So even if Duffy and Bars are making the right moves, they're going to try and button down on issue of authorities. They're going to try and button down on the issue of non-domiciled CDLs. What are they doing about all the ones that are already here, except this sort of like, oh, we placed them out of service and then they got back in the truck and kept going anyways, which we have numerous examples of people being caught that day again or the next day or a week later and it's the same guys, and they didn't leave the country and didn't leave the industry, despite failing at a fundamental requirement to have a CDL. So, like, what's your sense that the bars and Duffy and the rest of the regulators have any urgency with the sort of amount of people in the business that shouldn't be here right now?
Actually, their focus from like when I was up there 3 weeks ago, their focus was 100% on urgency. And the comment to me specifically from bars was, we only have 3 years that we know of to fix while we're here. So really my emphasis is we need to focus on our priorities. And 3 years is not a long time for government slow roll change, right? Like, I understand everybody wants a quick fix. We should be able to shut this down right now, close everybody, send everybody back. But there's a lot of things at play here. And one of the things, especially on the immigration side, that people don't realize is like the 287G deputization program, to where enforcement can actually enforce immigration regulations and be marshalized by DHS. That's not a DOT thing. DOT can't do that. They have to partner with DHS to basically deputize that agency to be able to enforce immigration rules. That requires cross-departmental function, which we know is a disaster in DC. That requires DOT to work with DHS to then work with whatever state or state agency partner to actually enforce immigration, if the state's willing to do it to begin with. Virginia just gave up their 287G when Spanberger got elected. So Virginia State Police was 287G deputized. They are no longer taking part in that program as of last month. So
way to go, Virginia, you clowns.
Yeah. So you've got all of these issues at play all the way down to the state level and sometimes the local level. So you got all these people that could be on different pages, right? So then you've got the Justice Department. Say we do figure this out. We figure out we've got a bad actor and we want to charge them. That's not DOT. That's usually Inspector General DOT going to DOJ. They get charged. And then, like, if you look at Massachusetts in the Westfield transport case with D'Artagnan Gazanov, he got offered a no-time plea agreement for killing 7 people on the highway and hiring an unqualified illegal truck driver. When you have all of these elements at play, it's difficult to enact change, but focusing on the priorities, like low-hanging fruit, this is what we can do right now to change things in the instant, that we have the power to change, where there's not agendas driving and lawsuits fighting us. This is the first bucket. We focus on this for right now. And while X team is doing that, we're going to put another team on bucket B and another team on bucket C. Maybe the lawyers are all bucket C, and they're pushing the hardcore stuff that's going to take interdepartmental stuff, long-term projects. But then you've got basically buckets of priorities with different teams focusing on those. And basically my argument in that article was, put something in place that doesn't give out any more authorities, doesn't issue out any more ELD authorizations to enter the market. All of these things get checked before they go on the market, not 12 to 18 months later. You got 21 days. These people need to be checked before we actually issue that authority. That limits what goes into the rest of those buckets, right? You're stopping the flow of crazy. You're enacting a barrier again. And then you've got teams that focus on one team is looking for and figuring out who they are and then cleaning up what's in the system. And then the third bucket is enacting like policy change, projects, ongoing, etc. But we know that they're focusing on this in a methodical way. And part of the reason is they tried to go full bore last year. And we're going to make you stop issuing non-domicile licenses on an emergency order declaration. We're going to skip the notice of proposed rulemaking, which is the process you're supposed to go through, and we're going to force you to stop issuing non-domicile license. Well, the problem with that emergency declaration was everybody argued and started filing lawsuits that you don't have the power to do that because you're skipping your own proposed rulemaking processes. You're not taking comments. You're not looking at any of this, and you don't have the data to support the emergency order. And then it goes to the Court of Appeals and they lose. And everything they had just done for the past 8 months goes in the trash can. People stop, now they're issuing non-domicile license again, or et cetera, et cetera. So it's, they learned from that instance that going full bore without being methodical, wasted 8 months of their time. So now they're going at it. This is the processes we must follow unless we want to go through this crap again. So
there's no executive power either on the part of Duffy as transportation secretary or the president himself, like, that could declare a public emergency, which says, hey, we are having this crazy increase in truck crashes. Most of the people involved are crooks. The drivers are illegal. They got dodgy CDLs from states that aren't doing things properly. Just look with your own eyes at everything that's happening here. We are declaring an emergency and we are doing this. And then once the emergency is over, we'll go back to normal operations. The government does this all the time. Like, we are a society that's managed by, like, everybody's got having their hair on fire. Look what happened during COVID. You know, every time the economy has a hiccup, oh my God, it's an economic emergency. So they do this stuff. Why not for CDLs?
So some have the president definitely has the power. He might be a cabinet secretary, but his powers are not the presidential powers. There's still guardrails and rules and agendas, but more than that, even during COVID, when everybody thought it was a great idea to restrict us to the level they did, there were still countless lawsuits that the government had to battle to fight those arguments. So just because you have the power to do it, you also have a very, very active judicial branch, which has been weaponized by the opposing agenda that's fighting anything you try to do that opposes anything that they want. So immigration is a hot topic. The left is very pro-immigrant, very pro-immigration. The right, which is in control, is very anti-immigration, anti-illegal immigration, let's say. And those are going to battle it out. Like, you don't have any centrist function of society anymore. Now you have the far left and the far right, basically. And when one proposes one thing, it's just it's just nature. Like, they have to battle against that. So I think what they've gotten to the point of is thinking we might have the power to do X, but what fight and what resources is the fight going to drain us of while we try to battle that out just by ramming it through? When we could just go through the right process, and then we've got less likelihood of a lawsuit to fight it afterwards because we have the grounds for it.
Right. Yeah, that might not sound very satisfying to people whose family's been hurt or killed by one of these folks and are rightly upset about the presence of these carriers on the market. Yeah, the whole right-left thing is interesting, you know. So I've written for a bunch of fairly prominent right-wing coded publications, and I have sent pitches to, you know, mainstream quote unquote center left places about problems in trucking because I've got various media contacts who like brush up against those big guys. New York Times, Washington Post, the Atlantic. You know, my one of my wife's childhood friends is married to somebody that works at the Atlantic. We know each other, we're friends. They know my book's coming out. Sent them a pitch, back and forth about that for months just to get the pitch accepted. And it just got thrown into a fucking hole somewhere and forgotten about because it went higher up the food chain at the Atlantic and just disappeared. Because, you know, on the thing about the left being pro-immigration, they've got to the point now where they're so pro-immigration, pro-migrant, xenophilic about the entire rest of the world that there's literally no concern anymore for American workers, like none. And if you try and defend American workers, you're immediately cast as some, like, you know, right-wing anti-immigrant Nazi bad person, and your opinions and concerns don't count anymore. And it's been very revealing to see how all of that works over the last couple of years. And it's happened, and it's still going on, right? So, like, you know, Trump comes down with this executive order to reinforce the existing law for English language proficiency. And in the past few months, we've seen some apologia, or what I call apologia, in the mainstream media. You know, LA Times did a piece on these California trucking companies that can't get drivers anymore because the Indians are all afraid to go trucking. And the New York Times, same thing. And any of those pieces, did they none of them consulted with anybody in the industry that knows anything except the American Trucking Associations, who we all know what they're all about. They didn't talk to you, didn't talk to Danielle, didn't talk to FreightWaves, didn't talk to anyone that knows what's going on, didn't consider the displacement. The like how many thousands of American trucking companies have gone out of business in the last 4 years during this freight recession thing, which it appears we're finally getting out of now. But like, all of that sort of destruction, lost jobs, in none of these pieces did they discuss the reality of the problems with like the holes in the system being opened up to accommodate these people have also accommodated a lot of scamming, no vetting, no training, throwing people out on the road that have no idea what they're doing. And then they get in collisions and kill people. Most of the locus of these articles is Trump is a meanie to Indians.
Yeah.
Like they've just boiled it down to that. And like all other considerations and all other nuances are gone. And like, this is supposed to be like the mainstream media where we actually like think about things big picture and consider everything. And they're not.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things. I think one, we've kind of looked at society as more of a globalist society where everyone is welcome from the left side. And I think part of the issue with that is we're focusing exclusively on that and exclusively on what I would call Trump derangement syndrome, because if Trump proposed it, it must be bad. Even if it's a good bipartisan initiative, it must be bad. We must go against it. We must fight it. But then there's another part of this where I think we lost a lot of like the whole like personal responsibility concept. Because if you look at this guy in California, they did the article on Gilson. I'm getting ready. I just got given a case for him.
Yeah, terrible company.
Yeah, it's a trash company, and they're not looking at the fact that the reason he's being pushed out of the market is because he made decisions to come here and do things illegally and to not do things the right way and to bypass norms. They're actually just looking at the other two pieces. And that's why we have people who are defending criminals, pedophiles, rapists, and murder immigrants in Minnesota fighting the police who are trying to get them out of the country, because none of those things, none of those matters of personal decision making and personal responsibility come into play anymore, because they are the pawns of the agenda, right? So we've got to push this globalist culture and we've got to push this anti-Trump culture, and that's all that matters. So it's become an issue.
Yeah, I'm it's sort of disheartening to see. I have to wonder if my book might shake that up a little bit because, a lot of book nerds, there's a lot of folks that you might call libs or progressives that are also heavy readers, and if it makes any penetration there and not immediately dismissed. We have those people in trucking too. You mentioned Jason Miller earlier, this professor out in Michigan who studies logistics and whatnot. I've never interacted with the guy before. Someone else tried to hook me up with him to get him on my podcast. I don't know what happened there. But anyway, he reads my FreightWaves article talking about some of this stuff that drops on Christmas Day. Thanks, Craig. At least he had me. No, I've never written anything for FreightWaves before. Craig says, hey, man, yeah, I like your pitch. Let's do it. Because Craig and I have a common enemy, the American Trucking Associations. And so I write this piece because the ATA have noticed that people like you and Danielle and me and Justin and other people in the trucking media space are gaining some traction with getting our message out and talking about the reality out on the road. And the ATA are trying to pivot. And, now finally Chris Spear is saying, well, maybe there isn't a driver shortage right now. And that guy, Bob Costello, is saying, it's not a shortage of like drivers, it's a shortage of quality drivers. It's like, well, no shit, Sherlock. We've been saying this for years, and you guys have been fighting us every step of the way. And as recently as April 2025, you guys were saying there was not actually a problem with too many migrants in trucking and, all of the various skills deficiencies that come along with that. And now all of a sudden they're going with the Trump agenda because they know that's what's popular. So I write this article for FreightWaves pointing all of this out, talking a little bit about the history of the ATA's messaging on this stuff and Chris Spear being a duplicitous fucktard. This Miller guy wrote this big, huge, long screed on LinkedIn attacking me, ignoring counterpoint evidence that he said I didn't bring to the article. He just like completely misses it, accuses me of making an argument I wasn't making. Like he did the lib thing where like he got to the part of the article where I talk about the apologia in the media that's helping the ATA launder their previously bad messaging. And in those articles, it's like, you're talking about these, Punjabi trucking companies. And I think that just lit off a sensor in his head that said, oh, no, this guy's criticizing immigration. We have to go on the attack mode. And I get that. Well, my wife is a Bernie Sanders progressive. She immediately gets her back up at like any mention of certain things.
Yep.
So it's like we're in a zeitgeist in a sort of collective mental space where half the other people we're dealing with, they see certain words, phrases, issues brought up, and then immediately they just like, they either want to attack you, back away from it, or not acknowledge reality.
Yeah, and I think some of it is part of a centrist mentality where they're not far left, they're not far right, they're still trying to maintain center. And having dealt with Jason, I'm not going to say one way or the other on what spectrum he's on. I know where I think he leans, but that's more of like a personal feeling than it is an affirmative. But I'll say this, he agrees with a lot of what we say, but the problem with people like him, and I don't know that it's a problem per se, because in some cases it's a really good quality. They're very data focused. And like, there's perception from people like you and I and people that drive trucks and that are on the road every day and watching crashes. And we're making assessments based on what we see happening in the industry that can often be subjective, right? And non-domicile licensing is a good example because the emergency declaration was based on non-domicile drivers are causing more crashes, they're killing people. They are killing people, but the court asked, because of the lawsuits, can you provide data to support your emergency declaration that actually quantifies and proves the fact that non-domiciled CDL drivers are killing more people than anybody else? And the problem is that the FMCSA came back and said, no.
So here's the thing, and I'm glad you brought that up because, if I wanted to be insulting to Mr. Miller, and I don't, but at the same time, I have to defend myself here.
Yeah.
There's a term or a meme I like to play with on Twitter called spreadsheet brain, right?
Yeah.
Where people are completely focused on data points that have been approved by some authority. So the reason that FMCSA said, no, we don't have the data is because that type of data is not collected.
Doesn't exist. Right.
You go to the DMV or the relevant DOT authorities in certain states and say, can you break down for us, the crash statistics from your state by employment authorization or work visa that the driver has? Yep. What country are they from? Is their CDL non-domicile? What trucking school did they go to? They don't collect that data. Right. So of course these people can come and say, oh, you don't have anything to prove this. Well, in the spreadsheet brain mentality, if something hasn't been gathered together and quantified by the relevant authorities, even though that data is out there and it exists, if it has not been collected in the way they want it, to them, it might as well not exist. Yeah. Which discounts human level experience. And, it gets back to the sort of quote by George Orwell, the party told you to ignore the evidence of your ears and your eyes, as their final, most essential command, right? From 1984. Like, you're not allowed, like, what you see, what you observe, if it doesn't match what the party wants, then it doesn't exist.
You're a conspiracy theorist.
You're a conspiracy theorist. And so people like Miller, whatever, he's a scientist, he's an academic, that's fine. He has to work in this world of spreadsheets. But if the party, by their control of the DOT and the DMV and how that data is collected don't collect that data, well, we have a problem here.
Yep. And we've changed the way we collect NHTSA FARS data and stuff like that from crash fatalities on highways, but we didn't collect ethnicity data. And that was one of the issues that I had when this whole thing started. I don't know, beginning of last year. One of my issues was there was a tow company that I don't even remember that. I've got it all in somewhere. And they said, well, 80% of the crashes that we work are foreign drivers. And my question was like, we don't collect ethnicity and race information on this. So how do we know that? And like part of my brain is very Asperger's, ADHD. I want the data, I want to know the information, but there's another part of me that comes from the streets that's basically perception and common sense and knowing how the world and people work. And that side of my brain largely pushes the data element out unless the data element is so overwhelming that I have questions at a minimum. But I think you can be split brain, but those people are getting fewer and far between because there's so few people that have common sense street smarts anymore that they don't use that part of their brain. That's just it's what we're told or what it's what's on paper, which sometimes are the same thing. But that's just that academic spreadsheet brain mentality that you're talking about. If you can't prove it on paper with real data where we've like held our controls and we know our t values and like we've examined this data to an nth degree with all other biases removed and all other variables removed and considered, and if you can't do that, then we don't have a conclusion. And that's a tough world to live in because I mean, what do we know that's absolute to that degree? And it's not much.
No, and they say that while actively preventing you from collecting the data. Oh, you're not allowed to ask that question. That's not relevant.
That's racist.
Yeah, no, they put you in a catch-22. We need to see the data, but you're also not allowed to collect the data. Like it's Yosari and trucking or something.
Yep.
That's a catch-22 reference, by the way. Kids, go read it. Oh man. So so you've written so much here. I know I wanted to ask you about the insurance piece you did on X. You recently discussed the chameleon carrier thing. Actually, let's touch on that for a minute here, because just this week, Duffy, the DOT, announced they're gonna, have AI. They're gonna request and build some AI tools to chase down all these chameleon carriers who are a big part of the problem here. And it's great for them to acknowledge that. However, I am skeptical of all this stuff. I'm not a big fan of AI or automation. I mean, it does have its uses, I suppose. I'm not like a total Luddite, but there's points of diminishing returns with this stuff. And I saw that, and my immediate, gut human level reaction was, hold on a minute. Why are they going to go spend money on all this AI stuff when, like, Danielle and you guys have been doing it for free on Twitter for like at least a year? Like, it's all there. The data has been collated by people and it's available to you right now. Why do we need an AI tool? Like, can you speak to that a little bit? Was that part of your article?
Well, I think I think that goes somewhat to the scalable article that I did on Friday. Like, we have to find a way to scale the human resources element. And one of the funny things about information and detecting these things is there was a memo that came out, I want to say mid last year, that said we are going to start this system, and it's going to detect chameleon carriers and where we have plates and VINs and officers and emails and phone numbers and addresses overlapping. It's going to red flag these carriers. And I'm reading this and I'm like, and I wrote the article on Archie probably early last summer, and Archie has existed by congressional mandate for DOT FMCSA to use for this exact purpose since 2013. We built this system for $4 million. It screened carriers. We know it did because they released initial data on it. And it was the same exact system. The methodology was almost exactly the same, right? So it's like if we've had that for 13 years, yet we still have the chameleon carrier problem that we have today, what would revamping that system in 2026 do to help us if it hasn't already helped us in the past 13 years? Is it because it's being run on autopilot? Is it because things didn't it fell out of the priority category? Why are we all of a sudden interested in this again? And we're just reframing Archie to be a new system when we've actually had it for a long time. Um, I think there's good elements to tech, like kind of filtering into the system to say we can use tech and AI to scale our human resources approach, especially for different buckets. But it's really difficult to add context and the human perspective element to an AI model, especially right now. Not to say in 10 years we won't be there, but right now, computers are still stupid, right? If you don't put in the right prompt or you don't put in the right command or syntax, the computer's not going to do what you want it to, and it's not going to give you the answer that you want it to give you because it's dumb. It's only taking the command that you give. And if you have people who don't really understand the problems or the context or the perspective, they're not going to enter the right prompts. So they're not going to see the right things. And that's a lot of the problems with data aggregate tools that we have on the market from FMCSA. It just regurgitates the data that FMCSA has and has zero context as to what it might mean or how
That's
they're.
well, I mean, you see that, another analog or comparison to this is AI search tools online.
Yeah.
Every web browser now has an AI option, and all you can do is you see it. If it goes and searches Reddit for an answer, it's just regurgitating back human answers at you that it like put together in a pile and ranked. And some of that's garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah. And that's where the context comes in and perspective comes in. Someone has to review these flags. So I think it's a good scaling tool to flag things faster rather than having a human review 50,000 folders of documents. AI could do that in minutes and give you basically the gist of flags that you're looking for, but then somebody still has to review the flagged files, right? And that's kind of where I look at the buckets of one, stopping people from getting into the industry is a paperwork issue. You're reviewing documents, you're reviewing carriers to make sure they have things in place, and the ones that are flagged have to be reviewed. The second bucket, where we're trying to weed people out of the system, that's not really an AI process. That's not something that you need perspective, context, intuition. You need to understand like how all these things work together, and
You
like
need to you need to show up at the apartment complex that's got
yes, yes,
70 or 400 companies listed in it and knock on all the doors and find where the directors of all these companies are and where their records are. And if they're not there, you immediately shut that company down. Right?
yeah.
So this is something else people have been asking about. Imminent hazard orders. Right? So I think they finally pulled the trigger on that with these guys in Chicago employing this Kyrgyz dude that killed the Amish guys in Indiana. Um, is there some reason that Duffy and Bars and DOT and FMCSA are not using this stick more often? Like you've got it, imminent hazard order. Like just send people out and just start whacking. Like what's going on?
It's hard to say, and I'm assuming it's got to do with the threats of the anti agenda, the anti this administration agenda that they're going to have some battles to face on the due process side of things because anytime you issue an imminent hazard order, there's not a lot of room for you to argue your case, right? Like this is an we are declaring you an imminent hazard. You are to close your doors immediately. And then they monitor your VINs to make sure you're not jumping and swapping and leasing them on somewhere else to continue to make money. So there's a real threat to your ability to function. And this particular element out there in Chicago that just got shut down, that was like a $200 million a year revenue operation. So it was significant. So I expect for them to go some legal route to try to fight that, that closure. Whether they'll be successful or not, I don't know. But I think that's the real piece of it. The argument is people should have due process when you're going to cost them their livelihood. And
That's well, I think the American people and innocent motorists and the families, grieving families, also deserve some due process.
yep,
And this gets into the realm of like politics, right? And like retail politics and the court of public opinion,
yep.
right? So if you're President Trump and you're looking at midterms and then you're looking at the next election, and you want to galvanize your people to come out, um, what better retail politics than to have Duffy and Bars go out there and close all these companies down and then just say, "Oh, you're going to sue us? Well, we'll see you in court."
Yeah.
Like, because that. I mean, that's a very Trumpy reaction, right? And like by doing that, he wins, right? Sure, yeah, maybe DOT has to spend more money on lawyers and FMCSA, and the things drag out, and maybe it is a back end problem. But from a retail political perspective, it's all huge W's. Like, why not just go on that strategy?
Well, I think the issue is you will win on that side, but where you could lose is if you somehow get an activist judicial branch judge that says, you know what, I agree that there could be some constitutional issues on due process here, and we're going to stay this order, put this company back in business, and they're going to be back on the highway with their non-domiciled chameleon carrier operation until you get some final ruling, which maybe takes 3 to 6 months or 12 months. And in the meantime, you've got these people operating on the highways, right? So I think they just finally got to the point of saying, you know what? Let's just do it. And if we got to fight it, we got to fight it.
I know. Well, this is the thing: is like the process is the punishment in lawfare, but it's also used against legitimate concerns. Like, you have a legitimate concern as a polity for the safety of your citizens, and the functioning of your supply chains, and these actors are bad, and just call them out. Okay, cool. All right, judges, show your hand. You want these dangerous criminals still operating on their road because you want to follow my process? Okay, cool. We'll see you in court then.
Yeah.
Like I say call their bluff.
Yeah. And I think that's what they did here, because they didn't do it in other cases. They didn't do it with Hope Trans. So I think they just got to the point where enough was enough. We're just going to battle it out. That's the only thing that I can think of. But I would almost expect this group, unless they're criminally charged, to do some due process civil litigation claims.
Right. So the story isn't over.
I would expect not with the amount of resources that they have.
Yeah, and interesting how guys from Kyrgyzstan can show up in America, run a completely dodgy operation, cycle their drivers in and out. There was a video of these guys with their facilities. Hey, we've got like a place for you to do laundry and play video games and hang out, because you're not going home, because home isn't in America. You take your 34-hour reset in Chicago because you actually live in Kyrgyzstan or Kazakhstan or Tajikistan. And, we're skimming off the top of this. And then, the civil lawyers come along and say, well, we'll skim from it as well and fight for you to keep, replacing Americans and being a danger to our society because reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm glad they took that stick. And if Duffy and Bars or any of their people listen to this, or if I ever get the chance to meet them, just keep going. Just imminent hazard order all of these bastards out of operation, and duke it out in court and let them show why they think, trucking companies that have a extreme disregard for the law, for the safety of American motorists, and for the sustainability of the industry, which is, the sort of lifeblood of the American economy. You guys clearly don't care, and you're only here for money and to parasitize. Okay, cool. Okay, lawyers, show us why we have to tolerate this crap and why American trucking companies should be undercut by these guys because you think that foreign nationals have some intrinsic right to come to America, while how many American truck drivers are working in Kyrgyzstan or Serbia or Eritrea or Somalia or the Punjab and crashing trucks at scale when they look like me? How often is that happening? That's right. Zero. There are zero instances of that ever happening. All of this flow is in one direction. Get on the stand and explain to the American people why we should allow this to carry on.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a funny thing about commonality, and if you've got time, I'll show you this when we get off the recording. Um, the amount of insurance companies that are insuring companies that have the most fatalities and the most crashes and the most injuries, and it's a lot of times the same exact insurance companies. They're so subprime and so ingrained with subprime carriers, um, that they're not concerned as much about the cost, especially if they're a risk retention group that'll just collapse. And then even if you get a settlement, you don't get any money. Um, that's one of the articles I was writing about the other day because there's no guarantee on the back end. And it's funny to watch how these indicators in the market kind of all tie to the same trash.
It's very interesting that it's all of the same flocks. How's the old saying go? You'll be judged by the company in which you keep.
Yeah.
Perhaps you will be judged by the insurer who
Yep.
allows you to be on the road.
Yep.
Rob, you've been very generous with your time. We could go on about this at length, but my household is starting to wake up here, and as you can see, Georgia
They
came
want
to say
pancakes, right?
hello. Yeah, probably pancakes, and then I think we're going out a little bit later. So I got to get to work. But thanks for coming on the show and describing all of the issues you're tackling with such fervor. For the word cells for people who actually read, I encourage reading long form articles and getting full details on things. It really helps you understand what's going on. I know that there's a war out there for our attention spans, and we're losing that in some ways. But I like to see that you're fighting on the correct side. Where can people find you, Rob?
We're all over the place. Trucksafe.com, FreightWaves, X, the usual.
And then you also have your great Substack, the T and or
Yes.
Talking Reckless, depending on how you type it in.
Yep. I need to get back to that too.
Yeah, I had to explain to my copy editor of my books. There was like a series of layers of editing that went on, and they were checking all of my links and citations. And they're like, "This Rob Carpenter guy, is he called the T or is he called Talking Reckless?" And I had to explain to this like copy editor guy that Twitter throttles Substack links, and so a lot of Substack users actually have two different URLs to bypass Elon Musk's hard on against Substack.
That's it. That's it.
So yeah, go check Rob out at the T or talkingreckless.com. Really great stuff, super deep dives. Rob's the best of the best in the American trucking industry. And I'm glad to hear that you've been approached and met with Bars and Duffy, and I hope they take all of your research and experience on. Maybe I'll even get to meet them here at some point. So, Rob Carpenter, thank you very much, sir.
Thanks.
All right, way of the road.